Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine's Special Projects Manager, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Zoominar, How Women in Israel Are Losing Ground Due to COVID-19, with Eetta Prince-Gibson. Please note that today's conversation is being recorded and will be posted later this week. Please type any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can toward the end of the session. After today's program, you can find a variety of articles written by Eetta on our website at momentmag.com. You can also subscribe to the magazine, and we ask that you consider making a donation to help support our ongoing effort to bring you new and engaging opportunities like today's conversation. Please join us again next Tuesday, July 14th, when we celebrate Bob Dylan and recount the 1975 Rolling Thunder Revue with his lifelong friend Louis Kemp, who produced the iconic concert tour and is the author of the book Dylan and Me. You can register for this upcoming Zoominar, as well as watch our previous ones, like last week's program with Elie Wiesel's son, Alicia, by visiting momentmag.com. Now for today's conversation, How Women in Israel Are Losing Ground Due to COVID-19. Eetta Prince-Gibson, Moment Magazine's Israel editor, is an award-winning journalist and is the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. In addition to her writing for Moment, she is a regular contributor to Haaretz, Foreign Policy, and Plus 61J, as well as other prominent local and international publications. Eetta's writing has appeared in the New York Times and the Washington Post, where she served as deputy bureau chief. Eetta is currently a mentor for the Op-Ed Project. Joining Eetta today is Moment deputy editor Sarah Breger. She is also the director of the Daniel Pearl Investigative Initiative. She has won numerous awards, including first place for Religion Reporting of the Year from the Religion News Association and first place for Best In-Depth News Writing on Religion from the American Academy of Religion. Please welcome Eetta and Sarah.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for putting this talk together. First, I just want to congratulate Eetta on her just announced win from the American Jewish Press Association for her piece on gender segregation in public universities in Israel, which she wrote for us a few months ago. It's called The New Mechitza. It's truly a fantastic story, and I really encourage everyone to take a look. So, on to our topic. You've been covering women and gender in Israel for a long time. But right. Why should we be looking at the coronavirus pandemic through a gendered lens?
Yeah, it would, I mean, at first blush, it would seem, well, first of all, thank you and welcome to all of our listeners or viewers. And hello from Jerusalem. At first blush, we always think, or would like to think, that something like a virus is, after all, neutral, health being a neutral topic. And I think that what feminists have shown for quite a while is that that's not so. Health-wise, although there's not data yet, it may be that the virus affects people differently, affects men, women. We're already seeing that it affects the elderly and the young different. So to say a broad brush of something is health, therefore it's neutral, is certainly not so. But also something like the coronavirus is a social crisis and a political crisis as well as a health crisis. And therefore, we know that women's experiences in society are going to be different than men's. The way they experience the crisis, financially, socially, politically. Also, we're seeing a lot that women's values and priorities are different. It's what's called the gender gap. And it's usually measured politically, but we're seeing here, at least anecdotally, that women are saying other things are important to us than, some things are more important than others. We also know that in every country and in every place that it's ever been tested, everything from the Ebola crisis in Africa to the economic crisis in the world, women's status as measured by objective measures slips down after crisis situations. So we have every reason to say, first of all, we expect a drop. We're seeing the drop in Israel of status. We can look at particularly gendered issues. And certainly we should be on the lookout for every way that women will experience this differently, have different demands, have different expectations and different needs.
And is there any reason why, in particular, this is exacerbated in Israel?
Sure. We have, first of all, we have two factors that always make gender more prominent in Israel. One is we have an ongoing security situation and a ongoing warlike or low intensity and high intensity war situation. Those always, again, there's world data on this, make women, lower women's status. Women's issues become secondary to how can you worry about, women's rights when we're fighting a war here. We're fighting for our existence, and you were bringing up particularistic rights. We could be amused by the fact that 51% of the population is considered particularistic, but that is the way it's seen. And that kind of a view basically leaves out women. The other thing is we have a religious establishment that wants to keep women at the back of the bus, in this case, literally, and we've written about that in Moment, about women sitting in the back of the bus. We have a deputy minister who recently said that he intends to further the idea of women sitting at the back of the bus and turn it into a law. It won't happen, but that's the way we see things. I'd also add that we had a poor starting position. According to the 2020 report on women's equality issued by the UN, Israel ranked 64th of 153 countries. That's not great.
Wow.
And not only, we're 64th on the list.
Wow.
I think what we also have, and that we have to look at that, is, of course, a strong diversity. I mean, that's not true for many women. It's also not true across the board for all professions. Women do very well in the legal profession, on the high court, in the medical profession. But if you look at payment, we're still looking at a 30% gap on the average. What's scarier about that is that in 2018, we were 46th. Not that 46th is such an honorable position, but we dropped in 2 years to 64th. We also have only 27% of women across the board in positions of decision making. And if we want to argue about how that's considered, what's decision making, it's not a great stat, but we can quibble, but it isn't 50%. So it's poor. So we have a poor starting position from which to slip further down.
And then just to focus on the economy, I think Israel, like so many countries, the forecast is pretty bleak for the economy. Often that hurts women in particular. Is that going to be the same effect in Israel?
Oh, absolutely. We're already seeing that there's 30% more women who are applying for benefits who've been left on unpaid leave. And Israel did declare that unpaid leave would be considered unemployment. So that for unemployment benefits. We're seeing many, many more women. The figure is about 50% higher for women right now. Women were overrepresented in a couple of ways also. One is that the transparent professions, as we call them, the transparent workers everywhere tend to be women. They're women with little protections, poor salaries, and they're the ones who had to go to work. I'm talking about caretakers, cashiers, secretaries, janitorial personnel in hospitals, janitorial personnel.
Workers.
Yeah, they're essential workers. They're women. They're poorly paid. They're often here hired through manpower agencies. So they are going to take a terrible blow. Teachers, public health nurses, and pink collar workers who of course lost their jobs. When you're in lockdown, getting your nails done may not be your top priority, but for many women, that is their source of income, and getting your hair done. That is a serious and respectable source of income. Teachers are being cut back. We don't know how, we don't know what will happen. Public health nurses have been cut back, all women. So a lot of the systems that we have that at lower levels employ women, We also know that Israeli women have been harder hit in many of the sectors that men and women were supposedly equally hit, such as the tourist industry. Hotels employ women in lower positions, they're paid less. The last is something that happened yesterday that I am concerned about, which is that the Knesset passed legislation that the government would be able to override, would be able basically to enact legislation without Knesset approval. How that'll affect women in terms of protective legislation, for instance, it is you can't fire a woman who's pregnant. You can, but you need a special, it's a procedure.
Could you repeat that? I think it cut out, and I think what you're saying is really important. You're talking about the firing of pregnant women, right?
Yes, we have a lot of protective legislation here for women in the workplace. And it comes, we could argue what the source of it is, but it did recognize that women's experiences in the workplace are different than those of men, particularly around childbearing. Women undergoing fertility treatments, for instance, are excused from work, and those aren't considered vacation days or sick days. Pregnant women cannot be fired except through a particular procedure. The government can, right now, if it declares a corona state of emergency, bypass that legislation. Will it? I don't know. But again, if I think that everything should be looked at from a gender point of view and that we mainstream a gender perspective, yeah, I'm going to watch and see if women are going to get hurt more by that than others.
And so
I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, but didn't the cabinet already approve an emergency regulation that let pregnant women be put on unpaid leave without any sort of permission?
Unpaid leave is one thing, but that was because the government agreed to give them, that went to the court, and the court did not uphold that. It did uphold unpaid leave. It did not uphold firing. It upheld unpaid leave because unpaid leave was recognized by the government for this crisis as unemployment. So they're getting unemployment.
Okay.
What will happen when trying to get them back? Real good question. We don't know. Women, there's some soft data that says that women are not being brought back from unpaid leave as quickly as men, but then we don't know because we just went back into lockdown or partial lockdown this morning, so we don't know.
Right. I mean, and part of the reason why women may not be coming back to work in such great numbers is childcare. And yes, that's something, at least, I mean, in my circles, we're talking about all the time. The front page of the New York Times last week was, in the COVID-19 economy, you can have a kid or a job. You can't have both.
Right.
But Israel has been a pretty family-friendly place.
Yes.
Part of it is because they encourage people to have babies. Have they figured anything out in terms of childcare?
Well, again, anecdotally, there's a lot of reporting by the press of men saying how happy they are to be home. Mm-hmm. A man who very openly in one of the TV programs was saying, I was petrified of what I was going to do with my kids a whole day. I have never spent a whole day with my kids without my wife there. Mm-hmm. And I was the one working at home, and she was an essential worker. And I found out that I can even enjoy it. And there's a lot of anecdotal, we don't know. The truth is nobody knows how this will play out. Probably the workplace will change. One thing is that Israel has a longer work week than most advanced countries. So that again plays back on women more harshly. There are way longer hours. Will there be a movement of men who say, we don't want to go back to what it was? We want a new normal. The old normal wasn't so great, perhaps. Will it be, socially stratified? Probably. And not everybody has that option. So we don't know. We do know that working from home is working. Distance learning for children is not working. And when we say the educational system, though, that's what's keeping women home, the truth is that that's younger children.
Mhm.
You don't stay home from work for a 13 or 14-year-old, certainly not in Israel. In Israel, you leave 12-year-olds alone and kind of assume that the neighborhood will, work it out and people go to each other's houses. Should we be in total lockdown as we were at the beginning? Yeah, that'll be of concern even with older children because they do have to be supervised.
And
Right now, don't
schools
know.
reopened, but and now they're shut down again. But they did
Yes,
reopen.
they reopened. Again, not. I could raise a conjecture that one of the reasons that it was done so poorly, the opening of schools, which is all at once for all ages, is that nobody consulted with the teachers, most of whom, of course, are women, who would have told you that, one, you need to bring in the younger kids, not the older kids, that there's no way that you can control teenagers. And my daughter's a teacher, and she's saying, I don't want to be the one telling them to put their mask on all the time. I mean, I've been, from being a teacher and an educator, I'm turned into a policewoman and tell them not to say hello. And those of you who've been here know that Israel is touchy-feely and people do embrace a lot. And of course, the first thing that the kids did, having not seen their teachers for weeks, was to embrace their teachers. So what happened is that the schools became a major focus of the spread of the virus, and one by one shut down. We're in summer vacation anyway. The truth is people don't know what's going to happen in September or when the school year will start. Not a clue. So again, women are having trouble knowing where to go.
What you mentioned about not consulting women brings up a point that I think you've written about before, that the task force in Israel to combat coronavirus is made up of 23 men and no women.
Well, it was changed, but only because they went to the Supreme Court and screamed and yelled, and the Supreme Court said that that was not okay. So they added on a few women. But yeah, I think that there's also data that just came out the other day that women are not on television as much. The permanent news anchors actually are a lot of women, and on some stations they're even the majority. But as panelists, we're still seeing what we call manels, all male panels. And the usual explanation is, of course, that they couldn't find a qualified woman. Well, what we really know is that these things are either old boys networks. Some of those positions are paid. Certainly they're worthwhile for exposure and status and cred. But also, and this concerns me socially much more, I don't think that in any way is there recognition by the people in power or the people making decisions, including in the television, for instance, that a diversity of opinions, a diversity of people will actually bring about better decisions. It's not that is invalid in itself, of giving women the opportunity to express themselves, but that women are likely to express other things. Something that happened at the beginning, for instance, was that all unnecessary medical procedures were put off. Then everybody had to remember, oh yeah, well, you can't stop reproductive technology like IVF. You have to keep it going. But what about pregnancy termination? Women being pushed into their third trimester because the systems were shut down. They reopened, but again, that's because women got up and said, you're not listening. I think that there's not a recognition that this diversity has to include Arab women, Arab men too, but Arab women, has to include Haredi, ultra-Orthodox women whose needs are very different. These women, for instance, are many of them in the ultra-Orthodox community are the sole providers for their families. And many of them work under the table or within their own kind of world of teaching. I don't know how they're doing, but also I know that many of them depend on community welfare, and the community comes through, but if the community is in lockdown, We don't know somebody knows, but certainly the general public doesn't know. And it would be crucial to have Arab and Haredi ultra-Orthodox women on these committees making decisions. Instead, what we're seeing is a normalization of just seeing a lot of men talking. You open up a television and you see a manel and maybe a woman moderator. And moderators, it's not the same. They're not expressing opinions. And commentators, men.
Although I do think I could see, someone making the argument to you, we're in a state of emergency. We really just need to get the best people, on a task force, get the best people on television. This isn't a time for filling diversity quotas.
Except that diversity isn't just some vague, what would I want to say, just some vague value up there on a list. It's a way to achieve better solutions because it will be more inclusive. It will have broader definitions. This idea of security, not including welfare. And so we got to worry about health. Well, we know that a lot of the elderly were saying that they'd rather die of the virus than be alone. And there were a lot of people saying that. I'd rather see my grandchildren and then die than have 6 months of being alone in a residence and being stuck in my room. And there were massive cases of depression. So again, it's a better solution for the country. It's not just, let's be fair, as though it were some esoteric value.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and also I think it's probably no surprise that the countries that are doing the best in terms of the coronavirus are New Zealand, Germany, Taiwan, places that are, women-led.
Well, when I saw the Prime Minister of New Zealand giving a press conference, and also for children, and they did that in I think in Iceland. And, we can smile and say, that's so cute, but it's not just cute. Think about it as a parent for a moment of how reassuring that is to your children. And if you're trying to say to your kids who are scared, well, there's nothing to be scared, but nobody's relating to them, especially to older children. Again, that isn't merely an issue of values of children are important. That is actually better policy. And that's the argument we're making, that this is a policy issue, not a liberal issue of women having the right and equal representation. As to having women who are qualified, that argument can be put off all the time. That always comes up. It's an easy argument. We have a list called She List. It's similar to the list we have in America of experts in all fields, and they can be approached.
Well, that's actually one thing I wanted to talk about. Israel has a very strong women NGO and civil society organizations. How are they responding to this?
Well, one of the things that they've done is they've been the ones leading the fight and saying you have to pay attention to women. Something that I think is very important to note, and we haven't talked about it yet, is of course domestic violence. Yeah. I don't love that term because it sounds like everybody in the family is just hitting everybody else, but in fact, it's gendered, and it's most cases it's men attacking women and children. The incidence of gender violence has increased. More women are being murdered than in Israel already this year than all of last year, and we're only halfway through the year. And while, yes, it is more Arab women than other sectors, it's still large for their sector as well. In other words, we're seeing a rise across the board. The NGOs, what the NGOs did that was really very, I think, wise, was we have a very broad, a very wide group of security people who have guns. Anybody who's been here knows you come into a supermarket, you come into a mall, practically anywhere you go, there's armed guards. And many of these people were sent home because they were their places of work were non-essential. Well, they would have gone home with the guns because they're registered to them. And an organization here, an NGO called The Gun on the Kitchen Table, convinced the Minister of Internal Security, who's responsible for security companies as well as police, that those guns had to be collected and couldn't go home. We'll never know how many we prevented that way. It was a women's organization that went to the Supreme Court over the 23-man panel advising. Women coming out with op-eds from organizations in organized ways saying that the metaphors we're using are wrong. We're talking Israel naturally, the leaders naturally adopted this metaphor of Corona is something, it's a war. And once it's a war, we use security terms. And once we use security terms, of course, not only do we see a lot of men, our benchmarks of what's good and what isn't, and what's working and what isn't, are become very stilted. So what women have been doing is issuing, and women's organizations, alternate position papers, deliberately writing op-eds, insisting to be heard on radio, calling in to radio shows and TV shows, running a lot of Zoominars and things like that to say there's a different way to look at this. There are other issues to look at here, and we're preparing. Women are already looking very seriously, for instance, at what labor law is going to do or not do when this ends and however it ends. And what does this mean working at home? How do you pay people working at home? Many women work hourly, as opposed to global salaries. They might get screwed. Women get a lot of your salary is extra, like travel. Salaries are composed of a lot of components here. So we already have women's groups working very seriously to think about the new future. And it's something I'd love to see them doing with American feminists and Western and non-Western feminists about what's our new workplace going to look like and how are women going to fare in that new workplace and what should we be doing now to make sure it's better in the future.
Are they being listened to in the government itself?
No.
Okay.
Quick answer, no. Viso put out an extremely extensive report. The government didn't bother to respond to that they had received it. On the other hand, slowly they're changing the discourse or bringing to people's attention. I don't think it's changed the idea that any society needs. You can't give up 51% of your potential talent and assume you're getting the best. If you a priori say that 51% of the people aren't valid, their opinions aren't going to contribute, then you're not getting the best ideas. The marketplace of ideas is becoming very restricted. I don't think they've penetrated that. That's the glass ceiling of thought in the marketplace that I'm very concerned about. But I think that, a lot of people read it. Certainly, I've looked at some of these things by some of the labor lawyers and said, wow, I never thought of that. And it gave me a chance to think of a different life for my children, for instance, my adult children, in terms of how they could be working. So it's slow. I don't think we're going to see any revolutions here, but we might see change slowly.
Are there any women we should be watching who really have taken this project on?
I would watch the NGOs. I'd certainly watch a number of feminist NGOs. I think the Israel Women's Network is doing fabulous work, and I'm a little hesitant to say the ones because there's so many. There's Ittach, which is a joint Arab-Jewish women's group, and they're particularly sensitive to legal issues, but especially of underserved populations, such as the Bedouin. They were the ones who came out, for instance, with a very simple statement, but at the beginning when everybody was talking about hygiene and washing your hands. It's very hard to wash your hands if you don't have running water, as some Bedouin, or a large percentage of Bedouin, do not. So I would look at Itach Ma'aki, the Israel Women's Network, certainly Na'amat, the religious women's organizations like Emunah that are doing amazing work. And the organizations that are funding them, like the New Israel Fund, some of the American organizations that are funding through the NIF or directly these funds, educational funding, where women are involved in thinking, so that there's a lot of Ethiopian women, and not only women, but led by women, that if long distance learning is going to come in, what's going to happen to families that don't have internet? We're just creating a digital divide. So those are the organizations I would look at. I'd follow. If I would be very happy if we would feel that we're supported here, followed, financially supported, but also being aware of the really cutting edge work that's being done here, because it is cutting edge. We've always had a position in Israel where we have a good legal basis, and then it's never enforced. I mean, we have legislation that looks so good on paper. It's just not enforced.
Why? I mean, why is that?
Because the government would have to care enough and be convinced that it matters, and would have to allocate, money to this. Enforcement, it was never Israel's strong suit, and much legislation, in fact. That's where we fall down all the time.
Do you think
the
that
other
in the future?
I think that a lot of, we're in the middle of something. I think what many of us feel intuitively as individuals, and we're being very individualed because we're locked up in our homes and not meeting as much, is that something has to change. I don't want to go back to the old normal. I don't want to live like this, but I don't want to be crazed at work anymore. The men were saying, I found out I like my kids. The women saying, I don't want and refuse to maintain a second shift. I'm not going to come home from a work day and run a home. All of that slowly is happening. We also see some women politicians. Of course, this government is very male dominated, but within the opposition, well, first of all, there are actually within the Blue and White Party, there are 4 religious MKs that came in, women. And we're going to be seeing how they work. The Arab list, the joint list, has a number of very striking women who are saying that they are fighting for all women and have been very prominent. Eetta Prince-Gibson, whom we wrote an article about, No Patience for Patriarchy, we called it, has been out there dealing with the issue of women's rights in the economy, and is certainly as committed to women of every stripe as she is to Palestinians.
And to just go back to domestic violence for a second, which I think you touched on, but is so important. And you actually wrote one of the first stories about domestic violence in Israel in March. I'm curious, has anything changed since then? Has any new programs been put in place? I know the shelters were closed, which was a huge issue.
Well, the shelters weren't closed. The women weren't turned out, but nobody was moving because the economy was shut down and because nobody was supposed to be leaving their house for first by 100 meters. Then we were allowed to go to 500 meters, which of course made everybody argue if that meant as measured in, through the air or on the ground. So there were all these debates about that. But the shelters basically locked down. Since the shelters run at overcapacity anyway, there was no way to bring women into the shelters. We will never know how many women were at home. People think or say that because street crime is obviously down, but rape, for instance, is not usually a street crime, contrary to what people think. Dark alleys are somewhat less dangerous, and your home and the people you know are more dangerous. Some children were safer because they were kept away from uncles. You know, the issue of abuse, especially of girls, isn't only fathers, it's uncles and all of that. And because people were hunkered down in their own families, their own nuclear families, that there seems to have been some decrease in that. On the other hand, women being abused, we know we have every reason to assume that with an uptake in tensions, men feeling, what does it mean if you define my work as not necessary, unessential? And it's ostensibly an objective description, but the feeling is terrible. Violence, frightened, and now no money. Women are going to take a beating on this, literally and figuratively. So,
and obviously, I mean, this isn't an issue that's just focused on Israel. I mean, this is something that's happening all over the world.
Yes, but
No.
what we have again is numerous NGOs, Women's Power, what's called Ken, Koach Lenashim, a number of different organizations, Arabs and Jews working together, protesting. There have been protests even in lockdown against every time there's a shooting or anything like that. And there have been quite a few. It's over 20 already in Israel. We're a little country.
Or is it protests against violence against women?
Yes. I mean, there's all sorts of protests going on.
Israel loves protest.
Yeah, Israelis love to protest, you know, but, and so yes, we protest a lot. But yes, there's protesting specifically about domestic violence, not only, but yes.
So I know we have to get to questions, but before we do, I just got a text. There's been an upsurge or an uptick in COVID cases in Israel in the past few days. Could you just give us a little kind of state of COVID in Israel? I think before we thought Israel was the example that we should all be following.
Yeah, so did we. And you know, we thought we were the ones who we were going to be able to start to travel again, and people ordered tickets. No, we've seen a tremendous uptake from dozens a day to hundreds a day of new cases. We are not seeing a tremendous rise in the number of people who are on ventilators. The number of dead has not increased in any real frightening way. What is frightening is the number of people who are being infected, and the discovery of what they're calling mega infectors or super infectors, of people who have been out because they released the economy much too quickly. So right now we're looking at about 30,000 identified cases, many of them asymptomatic though. Now, how much of that is because of increased testing? We don't know. A lot of what we don't know, though, also has to do with politics. And that is where the country is beginning to get angry. For instance, people are saying, what if the virus is located in certain areas, in certain towns, in Arab areas, in ultra-Orthodox areas, in certain secular cities? If it happened later, but now that's where the concentration is, why are we all in lockdown? And again, we're not in complete lockdown, but it looks like we will be soon. Mostly what we have is new legislation that we talked about, without benchmarks or clear knowledge. You can get a count of how many people are sick today. As of yesterday, it was over 30,000. About 320 dead, and less than 30 in critical condition. But we don't know what that means.
And their top public health official resigned today.
Yes,
because no one was
public. She was responsible for public health, and she resigned amid quite a controversy. And now there's controversy over her resigning in the middle of the mess, which she did or did not create. Basically, she was criticized for not listening to other people and for not thinking that testing mattered. She was very much of the shut down the society and just, contain it physically, and let's not get carried away with high tech and testing and all of that. On the other hand, the other thing she did was did not allow a centralized body to put things together. So what we see is, for instance, a family member who's a nurse is a lab tech in Haifa, told me that they were getting results from Beersheba. So Haifa in the north, Beersheba in the south, why are they getting testing results? So, well, because there wasn't a central triage, so it kind of went wherever it went. Mostly, again, that'll connect to the question about demonstrating, is a very strong feeling of chaos. People using the term Chelm, which is, of course, the mythological or Yiddish village. It's a shtetl where everything is backwards and everybody's dumb. We're high-tech Chelm. Right now it's discouraging, and I think kind of telling is how much everybody's making of the fact that we were the ones who were supposed to be allowed in. We were the only non-Europeans that were going to be allowed into Europe, and then they took us off the list. It's really insulted by that. Like, we're so high tech that Greece won't let us in, Croatia, Cyprus won't let us visit because we're contagious. Joking aside, what you're seeing right now is a lot of discouragement and frustration. Not so much fear. People aren't sick. It isn't the kind of fear that I heard from my friends in New York or in Italy or in France. You see anger and frustration.
So let me just turn to the questions because I want to make sure that we get to them. Some of the, here, go ahead, Suzanne, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you very much, Eetta, for bringing this to our attention. We have a lot of good questions, and if anybody else has any further questions, please type them in the Q&A box. But we'll start off with what, if anything, are men doing to promote the rights of women? Have there been men that have stepped up to be an ally?
Yeah, first of all, one of them actually is in the government. The Minister of Welfare, Itzhak Shmuley, has been aware of this. Many of the organizations, like the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, will take on issues of equality, and then whoever's employed there will be the ones doing it. But no, we haven't seen men leading the way or men saying, I will not appear on this panel because it's a manel. And I believe that women should be there. We didn't see anybody fighting against the 23-man committee set up by the Israel National Security Advisory Committee, saying no. Anybody taking lists. In fact, what they said was, well, we meant to, we didn't find women. They backtracked. We've not seen any men leading this. And certainly the Prime Minister has not taken any responsibility for the inequality.
Thank you. You spoke at the beginning, you spoke about teachers, but not the social workers who had a sharp increase in work during the corona crisis and are now out on strike. Is that, in your view, another classic example of ignoring women's experience?
Yes, and thank you for whoever brought that up. I should have brought that up. Yeah, it's, again, a women's profession, and a profession that, like teachers, like nurses, underpaid, overworked, and not listened to. And their caseload just kept on spiraling, especially once things opened up and people could turn to the welfare agencies and turn for help. They're on strike and are refusing at this point even to deal with emergency cases, which includes removing children from homes in cases of violence or sexual abuse. So yeah, this is a thank you, whoever brought that up. I don't know how I let that slip.
Yes, I can tell you that was Judy. So thank you, Judy.
Judy, whoever you are, thank you very, very much.
People would like to know what is happening with the Western Wall. Are people still going there to pray? Any news from Women of the Wall? Are they still active? And I'm going to attach one other question to that as well. If women are still going to the mikvahs.
Yeah, mikvahs are open. There was a big issue about the mikvahs being open and were in terms of health and were they safe? It kind of died down, but the mikvahs are open, especially the private ones. But they are supposed to observe what was called here the purple standard, which is distancing and cleanliness and that, but mikvahs are supposed to observe that anyway. One of the political problems, though, by the way, is, for instance, that yeshivot are open, but pools are closed. And gyms are closed, but the yeshivot are open. So you can't, it's ostensibly because they'll social distance. And there was a feeling that that was a politically motivated issue. Not a feeling. Basically, the ultra-Orthodox said if they close the yeshivot, we'll bolt the government.
I read a piece that CrossFit got so angry that they have to be closed and the yeshivas are open that they decided they're going to start teaching Torah during their CrossFit classes to get around that.
Right, and the pool is going to, one of the pools has said that they're going to broadcast Torah lessons so that you can go to the pool.
And what about the Kotel? Are people still going to the wall?
The Kotel was for a while when everything was shut down, was limited to certain numbers of people, and it was open, but only certain people could go. And that was pretty much observed. Of course, needless to say that because you had to extend for the 2-meter social distancing, the women's section got ever smaller, so that I guess 2 women could socially distance, and women were not using the wall. Women of the Wall did have a service last week, and the Rosh Chodesh, the last Rosh Chodesh, it went over pretty quietly. I guess because the other people who oppose it couldn't congregate enough because of maintaining social distancing. So it went over quietly. But no, it's not a big issue. Certainly nothing good in terms of equality for women at the Kotel has happened. And the government has not gone back to in any way to accepting the guidelines that were once supposed to grant equality for everyone.
Thank you. Here in the United States, a lot of the protesting and movements are being led by young people. In Israel, is this a generational issue? Are younger people getting involved more than they have in the past? Are they going to help make a difference in the future once this is all said and done?
I don't think we're seeing this being led by young people for a couple of reasons. One is I think that, and this is something I hear from, for instance, from my daughter, who says that from the time she has a political sense of herself, the only prime minister she has ever known is Benjamin Netanyahu. There's very much a sense among young people that nothing matters. Just wait it out and work on the local level. Again, what we see here is this tremendous activity, including by young people, of social action. It's not government mandated, it's not helped, but we see social action, we see involvement. We don't see a lot of young people at demonstrations. I think right now also young people are a little overwhelmed by their own fears. I mean, what is the economy going to look like? If you were taking a degree in something, what job are you going to have? What does this mean? People are talking about going back to school only because at least it'll be something to do, but who's going to pay for that? So if I were a college student about to graduate, I don't know that I'd be particularly thinking about demonstrating right now. I'd be fairly depressed, which is what we're seeing. Depressed or at least anxious of what does the future look like, and the future is starting tomorrow. These are people who haven't worked long enough to have social benefits. Student jobs, working in all sorts of student-y ways doesn't provide you with unemployment. We are lucky, of course, and that is also something you have to take into account here. We have socialized medicine. People are getting medical care, irrespective of who they are, what they are, where they live. Medical care here is available for everybody. And so that is also, maybe it's taking the edge off. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where young people are at right now. I think they're, as I said, kind of down, depressed, and trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. And how, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, when you mentioned the future, I was curious about something that we're discussing a lot in, my synagogue, is what's going to happen with the Chagim with COVID? Are people just not wanting to deal with it now?
Who knows? Right now, you can't have meetings of more than 20. So I know my synagogue is on Zoom. We have Zoom, and we did open up we have like a porch, patio out in front of the synagogue. So that opened up and people were attending. That'll probably shut down again because it's a maximum of 20. And once you're done with the people who officiate, you've pretty much hit half of the people who are allowed to come. And it also involved signing up ahead of time. People are talking about using outside spaces, parks. We don't know. We don't, first of all, things were looking so good.
Right.
Only 2-3 weeks ago, that everybody was like, yeah, sure, for the Chagim, we'll be back. For the high holidays, we'll be back. Now we don't know.
Okay, sorry. Somebody would like to know how annexation might impact women and what is happening with this since the July 1st date has passed.
How will I guess, again, I'd have to give regarding annexation, I think it'll affect everybody, and therefore it'll affect differentially. I think it'll affect the economy, it'll affect women differentially. It'll affect the security situation, that will affect women, especially since we can assume that there will be terrorism, and women who care for children and are caretakers and have to move through the city more than men. At least in Jerusalem, we know that women travel the city more than men do and use public transportation much more. We can assume that if the security situation gets worse, as it did during the Second Intifada, women will take a terrible blow on this one. Also, once we start talking the language of annexation, and again, I don't want to get into the political aspects of occupation and is it good or is it bad? That's not the question you're asking. But the military language of annexation, occupation, sovereignty is never a language that's good for women. It's a language that sets a certain set of priorities and forgets other priorities, including welfare of everybody and the weaker members of society. Annexation will be outrageously expensive. So we can expect a cut in social services.
We're going to end with one more question. Someone would like to know, has the COVID crisis brought people together more, say Arab and Jewish women, to fight this problem that is bringing women down?
Absolutely. One of the things that these women's organizations that I mentioned, for instance, and another self-appointed team of experts, is to work on the topics of inclusive security, broader terms of security, and broader terms of diversity. And therefore are very deliberately making sure that there are Arab and Jewish women, including ultra-Orthodox women. All of the women's organizations are aware of this now. One thing, a very sad case right now, is that a man, a few days ago, a Bedouin woman and her children were drowning. And a Jewish man jumped into the water and saved them, but he was pulled out and drowned. Mm-hmm. And the entire Arab community has come out in ways to say, thank you that is just bringing tears to everybody's eyes. I mean, this is a major story of people visiting the Arab community, including right now, today, I'm an ODA from the Joint List. Also, something that brought Arabs and Jews together were the medical teams. Medicine is a place where Arabs have succeeded in integrating quite well. Many of them hold senior positions. And, you know, when you're being intubated, I think probably, or if you're being treated, the only thing you care about is the competence of the person helping you, and certainly not their skin color or their ethnicity. And people were working together. There was a lot of effort by the press and other organizations to say how wonderful this was. One organization taught Jewish medical personnel keywords in Arabic that were connected to treatment for COVID-19, for instance. Yes, there's very much of a sense of coming together. The government tends to try to create animosity between groups, and that has not worked during this time. Again, many of the transparent workers are Arabs. The low-level workers working as in janitorial and support staff and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, if there's something good that comes out of this, it has been the sense that we're all in this together. Very much so.
Great.
Actually, Fania Oz wrote a column about that in our last issue.
Right.
Really
Yeah. She's amazing.
Thank you. Before we wrap this up, Sarah, were there any other questions that you wanted to ask or any comments you had?
No, I just wanted to thank Eetta. I think, you know, we learned a lot, and there's so much in the case of Israel that, you know, can be mirrored in, you know, what's happening in the US. And in some ways it's a glimpse into our future in both positive and negative ways.
Yes, somebody I see wrote that it's depressing, are young women looking to emigrate now? No, I think that no more than they are out of anywhere else. I think everybody's rethinking what their future means, and will we be able to come out of all of this better in some way? Can we pull something positive out of staying at home more? Certainly appreciation of family life, reevaluation of values. And that's very much something I'd like to see women throughout the world, and certainly women together here, working together to reimagine a better place for all of us.
Thank you. One last thing, is there anything as Americans that American Jews can do to help in this situation?
Sure, I think that one is to know that you're following us. I mean, I think that it's very important to feel that we're being supported. And whether you're from the left or the right or whatever you think, in so many ways Israel's presented as the epitome of everything that's bad. Sometimes it's nice to talk about what's good, and not that COVID is good, but certainly the work being done here is very good. So knowing that you know about our work, read, become aware, contribute to the struggle for equality here, and realize that even in COVID-19, we have to think about what kind of a society do we want to create or come back to. And of course, I want to say financial support. I know things are tough for everybody, and they're tough here too. And organizations are closing down because they just aren't getting the support they need. As I said, I'd like to see us working together, coming up with ideas for the Jewish community, for the Jewish Arab communities, how we can learn from each other, Jewish-Arab cooperation in America, Jewish-Arab cooperation here, Muslim-Arab, or say Muslim-Jewish. Thinking about those kinds of things together and supporting each other in the work we do, right now through Zoom. But yeah, that would be very important, and I think American women might enjoy hearing some of the ideas that we're coming up with over here. Great.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Eetta, for bringing this to our attention. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sarah, for being in conversation with Eetta. Thank you for joining us. please remember to go to the Moment website where you can read many more articles by Eetta on a variety of topics. Sign up for additional Zoominars and subscribe to the magazine. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.